Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, a changing of the guard in women's racing as Demi Vollering takes a dominant win at the Tour de France Femmes Avec Zwift, the first Grand Tour win of her career. I'll be looking back at that, as well as the triumphant return of Remco Evenepoel ahead of the World Championships and La Vuelta. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that a post-race mineral water is the recovery drink of choice at the Tour de France Femmes Avec Zwift. That was Catherine Schweinberger of Ceratizit WNT sinking a left after the final day TT yesterday. We also learnt that Tadej Pogačar is using Strava to troll retired pros. Richie Porte had held the KOM on the Col de la Madone since 2016, but Pogačar bettered it by 30 seconds in the week, uploading it with the title "Baiting at Richie Porte to come back to Europe." Now, incidentally, Pogačar also put 17 minutes into my best time, which I did during my 10 weeks of Get Fit quick training back in 2019, although he didn't say anything about trying to bait me out of retirement. And finally, we learned that there has been a changing of the guard in women's racing. For the first time since the 2021 Giro Donne, someone whose name is not Annemiek van Vleuten has won one of the big three stage races. That rider, Demi Vollering. SD Works were dominant from start to finish, leading the GC from start to finish, winning the team's competition by over 12 minutes, winning 4 stages, filling all 3 steps of the podium on the final stage, winning the green jersey, and finishing first and second on the general classification. There were other riders and teams that did get a look in, and I'll get onto them shortly. The crunch point of the race was always going to be on the penultimate stage though, finishing as it did atop the Col du Tourmalet. Although short in terms of distance that day, it was a tough day out with the Col d'Aspin preceding it. There, Movistar went to the front and set up an attack for defending champion Van Vleuten. That attack, though, didn't do what it has done so many times in the past. Both Vollering and Nieuwiadoma were still on her wheel, and the latter flew down the descent, leaving the Dutch pairing behind. With a subsequent standoff, Nieuwiadoma took a lead of almost a minute during the stage, and as a real threat to the overall GC, for a while, it was looking really good for her. That was until Vollering made her move. Somewhat later than many had expected, but it certainly wasn't too late. A shake of the head from Van Vleuten told us all we needed to know. Vollering was on another level, catching and passing Nieuwiadoma as they rode into the clouds and soloing to the line almost 2 minutes ahead of the Canyon SRAM rider, with Van Vleuten a further 36 seconds back in third. And it meant that Vollering was almost assured the overall victory, barring disaster on the final day's time trial, but the second and third steps of the final podium were very much up for grabs. Nieuwiadoma started the time trial with a 38-second advantage over the world champion, with Kopecky just 7 seconds further adrift. Now that time trial was won by Marlen Reusser of SD Works, 10 seconds in front of Vollering. Van Vleuten had a particularly bad day by her standards, finishing 14th, whilst Nieuwiadoma had a good ride in 9th. However, with Kopecky finishing 3rd, she comfortably leapfrogged Van Vleuten, but ultimately would also pass Nieuwiadoma by just 21/100ths of a second. And I felt really bad for Kasia, although I guess people only generally remember if you've either won or if you finished on the podium, but at the same time, she must have been gutted to drop a place by such a small margin. So what about Vollering then? It has been an incredible year for her, and to be honest, the type of results I'd expected of her this time last year after Anna van der Breggen retired. Up to the start of this season, she'd won 12 pro races in 4 years. This year, she's won 15 pro races in 5 months. They include Strade Bianche, Amstel, Flèche Liège, and now the Tour de France. It has been the season of dreams for her, and I wouldn't be surprised if she capped it off with a rainbow jersey in the next couple of weeks, which would really complete that changing of the guard, wouldn't it? The win was not without its controversy though. Vollering was handed a 20-second time penalty on stage 5 for drafting behind her own team car to get back onto the bunch after a puncture. A few people messaged me asking if I thought that was a fair win given that incident, and my answer is yes. That sort of thing happens a lot, but the unwritten rule seems to be that it's okay to draft in the convoy of cars behind the race, just not your own team car. If you do that, there's not normally any kind of penalty, but SD Works' mistake was doing the pacing themselves. Now, the commissaire was busy wagging his finger at Team DS Danny Stam, who was later expelled from the convoy, probably more because of his comments after the race to the press rather than his actions during it. Now, the reason I think the win is still fair is because almost anyone who has a mechanical requires some sort of drafting to get back on. If not, you'll never get back to a group that's working well together. And if it happens to an unknown rider at the start of the stage that doesn't have a team to work for them, they'd likely be outside the time limit and therefore out of the race if they weren't allowed to draft to get back on. There's a big difference if you're simply dropped and you can't keep up, though. At that point, you should never be drafting in the convoy, even if that does still happen a fair bit. Anyway, moving on. A word on Annemiek van Vleuten. What a champion she has been and will always be. Her fourth place on the general classification was not what she came for, but that run of wins in recent years will probably never be equalled. 2021 Vuelta, 2022 Giro, 2022 Tour, 2022 Vuelta, 2023 Vuelta, 2023 Giro, and then fourth at the Tour last week. She has long been the yardstick by which everybody else has measured themselves and will finish her career at the end of this year with at least 103 pro wins. Chapeau to you, Annemiek. In the green jersey competition, Lotte Kopecky led from start to finish, and she became the first rider since Bernard Hinault to have won the green jersey and finished on the podium of the GC. She might have been 3 minutes down on her teammate Vollering, but I'm just wondering whether her thoughts might turn to a tilt at GC in mountain and stage races in the future, because she seems more than capable of doing so. Kasia Niewiadoma came away with her second podium in 2 years, whilst also taking the QOM jersey home. She took the lead in that competition on stage 7 on the Tourmalet, overtaking Jara Kastelein of Phoenix de Koning, who'd been one of the standout riders over the 8 days of the race. Off the back of the huge disappointment for her teammate, Julie van der Velde, on stage 3, she was caught by the sprinters inside the line. Kastelein went on the rampage a day later. She came to the line so far ahead of everybody else that Vollering thought she'd won as she crossed it over a minute later. That was the first ever road career win for Kastelein, who generally specialises in cyclocross, and what a place to do that. Despite the disappointment of Annemiek van Vleuten, Movistar had a really good race overall. Liana Lippert took her first World Tour level win in 3 years on stage 2, out-sprinting Kopecky, who had a flat tyre, and then Emma Norsgaard upset the sprinters on stage 6. Ricarda Bauernfeld of Canyon SRAM underlined her potential as a future great by winning stage 5 and finishing in 9th on the general classification, while stage 3 was taken by Lorena Wiebes, who unfortunately later had to abandon the race through illness. Best young rider overall was Cédrine Cabal of Ceratizit WNT. Overall then, a thoroughly enjoyable race that was extremely well supported both on the roadside and by TV viewers. Let's just hope there are some riders waiting in the wings ready to step things up and challenge Vollering ahead of next year, because otherwise, given the strength of her and her team, the GC might not be very close again next year. We shall see. Right then, what have we got coming up for you on GCN Plus this week then, after an action-packed July? Well, it's all go, I can tell you. The Tour de l'Ain starts today and runs through to Wednesday and is available to watch worldwide. But this week is really all about the first ever UCI Super Worlds in Glasgow. Starting this coming Thursday, and for a total of 11 days, the event will see almost 200 rainbow jerseys awarded to the newly crowned world champions. Road, time trial, track, BMX, mountain bike, indoor cycling and paracycling are all included. There's going to be plenty to watch. We will have a World Championships preview out for you later this week, which will focus mainly on the road and time trial events. But the event kicks off with the first of the track racing this Thursday. You can head over to the app to look at the full schedule of racing, but I will tell you that the men's elite road race is this Sunday, the women's a week later, with a time trial sandwiched between. Now, unfortunately, there are quite a lot of territory restrictions on our coverage of the World Championships, but you can watch if you're in Europe, excluding Denmark, Sweden, Italy and Norway. Beyond all of that, we have a couple of extra bonus races for you this week. On Saturday, we've got the Audi Denver Littleton Twilight Criterium, one of the biggest cycling events in the USA and part of the American Criterium Cup. We'll be streaming the pro women's and men's races live worldwide on GCN+. Last year, under some pretty atrocious conditions, Legion of Los Angeles went 1-2-3 in the men's and 1-2 in the women's. Time for somebody else to knock them off their perch, perhaps? We'll find out on Saturday night. Ahead of that, on Friday, we have one of the biggest and hardest races the triathlon schedule has to offer. The PTO Tour continues on GCN Plus with the US Open in Milwaukee, which will be followed by the Asian Open in Singapore on the 19th of August. And the world's greatest male and female triathletes will compete separately over 2 days on a grueling course consisting of a 2K swim, an 80K bike ride and an intense 18K run to the finish line. Don't miss a moment with live coverage of each round on GCN Plus, which is available worldwide. And just before I wrap up the other races from last week, can I suggest that to get yourselves in the mood for the upcoming World Championships, you check out a couple of our documentaries featuring former world champions. We've curated our own World Championships documentary collection where you can explore the backstories of legends such as Oscar Freire and Johan Museeuw, or go on a journey through the ages of velodromes, meet mountain biking's fastest family and discover the history of BMX. Head to the link in the description below to check out the full collection. Right, on to the other races from last week, and I'm going to start with the Clásica San Sebastián. Double winner Remco Evenepoel started as the race favourite, and he more than lived up to that billing. He went on the attack on the same climb as he did last year at a lights, albeit some way further from the finish this time around. And so perhaps it was planned that he would wait for some company. Alexander Vlasov bridged across first and later was joined by Alberto Bettiol and Pello Bilbao. The Italian had already been distanced ahead of the last descent, the Murgil, and it looked like that was where Evenepoel was going to go solo. Bilbao was in trouble early, but in the end was able to keep up with the world champion whilst Vlasov was distanced. With a descent into the finish, a two-up sprint ensued. Now, Bilbao has a decent sprint on him for a pure climber. Historically, Evenepoel hasn't had a good sprint, but he's made massive improvements in that discipline this year. Now, the mistake that Bilbao made was coming through to do a turn inside the closing few hundred metres. It left him on the front as they came into the finishing straight, and although he reacted very quickly when Evenepoel launched his sprint, he was already on the back foot and unable to get back on terms. So, a third win from 3 participations at the race for Evenepoel, who equals the record of Marino Lejarreta, who won the first 2 editions at the start of the 80s and another one in 1987. One thing is for certain, Evenepoel is ready to defend his World Championship crown. And it's going to be very interesting to see the dynamics of the Belgian team during the race though. Behind Bilbao, Vlasov held on for third, whilst another former winner of the race, Neilson Powless, took fourth, albeit almost 3 minutes down. The Circuit de Getxo arrived the following day, where Alexei Lutsenko took his 5th win of the season. He was part of a 6-man group in the finale, attacking them with just over 15Ks to go, and soloed to a 24-second win over Tony Galopin. That margin of victory would have been even more comfortable were it not for going the wrong way on a roundabout, despite the marshal showing him which way to go. It cut his advantage from 25 seconds down to just 8, but thankfully for him, it made no difference to the end result. And finally, at the Tour of Poland, Tim Merlier won the opening stage, whilst Matej Mohoric took victory on the summit finish on stage 2. He described that as the best day he's ever had on a bike. And when you look at the list of climbing talent that finished in his wake, you can see why he thought that. That race continues through to Sunday, but unfortunately we don't have any coverage of it on GCN Plus. That is all for this week then, but I'll be back with a wrap-up of the Men's Elite World Championships this time next week, so I will see you then.